Hello everyone, and welcome to the 225th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Shykrill from Star Wars. Well, it's been months since I last released a Star Wars video, and for that I apologize, as I did say they were going to be much more frequent than this. However, the episode that I had in mind to release next, that being an episode on Zim the Despot, ended up being much longer than I had expected it to be. And because other videos ultimately take priority over these Star Wars episodes, it's been hard for me to find the time to work on an episode that could very well be close to an hour and a half long. So instead of making you all wait even longer for the next Star Wars episode, I decided to shelve Zim for the moment and make an episode on the next person in line, Shykrill, one of the first Dark Jedi that I doubt many of you have even heard of. The Zim episode will be released eventually, I promise you that. But for now, I'm going to target some of the smaller fish in the Star Wars pond so we can get back on track with these episodes, something I'm sure you'll all be happy to hear. And if you'd like to know my philosophy behind these Star Wars episodes, click the card on your screen or head over to the Now video I made a while back that you can find in the Star Wars playlist on my channel. But with all that in mind, as you can see, this episode is relatively short. And the reason for that is because there are a lot of characters in this universe whose stories are more so footnotes than anything, and Cope is one of them. And with that in mind, this video mostly consists of me reading for you the short story he's featured in that can be found in the sourcebook Jedi vs. Sith, The Essential Guide to the Force, which I'll be reading from as soon as this introduction is over. And I've found over the years that when a character's story mostly comes from some sort of text, that the text tends to do a lot of the heavy lifting as far as discussing evil goes. But I have added some musings of my own towards the end of the video. For as much as these Star Wars episodes are supposed to be analyses like any of my other episodes, I am happy to expose all of you to obscure Star Wars characters, when appropriate, even if that means there isn't much for me to say in the process. Now without further ado, let's begin. For nearly as long as the Jedi have used their abilities to manipulate the Force, they have understood the dark side as a power that can influence and seduce even the most dedicated members of the Order. Existing records indicate that Jedi who were drawn to the dark side, but returned to the light, are greatly outnumbered by those who are unable or unwilling to leave the dark path. It is further stressed that no Jedi has ever emerged from this journey entirely unscathed. Jedi are hardly the only Force-sensitive beings vulnerable to the dark side. There are numerous cases of Force users, mostly from very remote worlds, who developed their powers with little or no knowledge of the Jedi and Sith. Some even cultivated their own traditions that were passed on to subsequent generations. However, few of these individuals and factions were as altruistic with their abilities as the Jedi. Not surprisingly, selfish and competitive beings were especially inclined to use their powers to dominate others. Because even cautious examination of the dark side can have dire consequences, the Jedi Order has long forbidden such study by all but the most highly disciplined Jedi Masters. It may be impossible to discourage those who are naturally inclined to explore that which is forbidden, but contemporary Jedi scholars hope to at least diminish curiosity by presenting the following information and case studies that offer unique and even practical insights into the dark side. Those who embrace the dark side have either claimed or been ascribed various titles. Perhaps the best known is Dark Jedi, something of a blanket term to describe anyone who is skilled at using the dark side of the Force. Dark Jedi are historically distinguished from Sith and dark side Force users by heritage and experience. More specifically, Jedi of the Old Republic regarded Dark Jedi as Jedi-trained individuals who had abandoned their Order's way to pursue a selfish and malicious agenda of their own design, and only those with direct Sith influence might be considered as Sith or Sith Lords. Because of these distinctions, two more accurate terms for a non-Jedi who wields dark side powers are Darksider, which dates back over many millennia, and Darkside Adept. Both terms were used by Palpatine to describe many of his dark side servants. Still, the term Dark Jedi remains most prevalent. Ancient records indicate a separate term for what a Force-sensitive being can become if he or she turns to the dark side early on, a dark side devotee. Unlike Jedi, who began their training during infancy or have a mature awareness of the Force, dark side devotees regard the Force as something supernatural, and they foster that image in the minds of others to make themselves appear more mysterious and powerful. Because their belief system may not recognize the Force as the same tool used by the Jedi or the Sith, they pursue a different path or develop their own traditions. Historically, not all dark side devotees were obsessed with power, but most did use their abilities to manipulate the environment and exploit the weak. Many took up careers as wanderers and adventurers. Although it is not known whether dark-side devotees ever outnumbered more benevolent Force adepts, they have certainly outnumbered the Sith ever since the Sith Order limited themselves to one master and one apprentice. One of the oldest records of a Dark Jedi, and possibly a dark-side devotee, comes to us via the Great Holocron from the Jedi Consular Sara Gorn. As previously noted, Sara Gorn was counted among the earliest Jedi during the dawn of the Republic. Upon first sight of a Gorn's hologramic representation, most assume that his appearance is the result of a degraded image, but lightwave analysis indicates otherwise. It seems he was a most unusual being, an apparently bulbous, soft creature who lacked limbs or facial features and had greenish gases continually surrounding his form, wholly unlike any species known today. The following recording dates back to approximately 500 years before the First Great Schism that divided the Jedi, and 18,100 years before the exiled Dark Jedi arrived in Sith space, at a time when the Jedi may have still been developing their terminology for the Force. Although the dark side is not mentioned by name in Sara Gorn's record, his descriptions leave little doubt about the nature of the shadows. You ask of my first awareness of evil. That is difficult for me to say. It is not that my memory fails me, but that memories are based on our perceptions at specific moments. Are there not beings, things, or places that you regarded as evil when you were young, but that you subsequently determined were not evil at all? Did you eventually forgive the inconsiderate relative, the howling wind, and the ominous structures that never really posed a threat to you, except in your own imagination? Furthermore, how shall we define evil? The common definition is that which is profoundly immoral or wrong, such as the desire to deliberately cause great harm, pain, or upset. But let me ask, if I told you that right now, at this very moment, your involuntary breathing was killing sentient microscopic innocents, would you choose to continue breathing? And even if you found a way to end the massacre, would it disturb you if you were unable to convince the microscopic survivors that you never meant them harm, and that they and their descendants would consider you evil and wish you dead for the devastation you brought to their loved ones and civilization? You say that I tend to answer questions with too many questions in return. Well, how else will you learn to think for yourself? Oh, so you wanted to know if I have ever known of a Jedi who turned to evil. You might have asked that in the first place. For that question, I have a most specific answer: the Jedi Shykrill. First, let me say that this is a most unusual case. As Jedi, we are bonded by our agreement to use our powers for the goodness of all beings, not for personal gain or to exploit others. Yes, there are times when one is tempted to use the Force simply because one can, but if one does not know when and where to draw the line, then ask more questions, and I shall draw it for you. Now, about Shykrill. My fellow Jedi and I had been searching for Force users like ourselves in the outlying systems of the Corellian sector when we found young Shykrill on Sarcophagus, the graveyard moon of Sikoria. At the time, the boy was living with his family, who were groundskeepers. We had not found him by accident, but by way of a report from a Solonian widower who claimed to have witnessed Shykrill using telekinesis to lower his wife's coffin into an open grave. Shykrill seemed like a most unassuming child, but was indeed able to move objects through the air with little difficulty. Although some families had been reluctant to allow their children to join the Jedi, Shykrill's parents were most accommodating, and they even seemed genuinely grateful to us for granting their son the opportunity to rise above his station on Sarcophagus. And so the boy left with us to train as a Jedi. He was such a bright child, always displayed a pleasant disposition when he asked for more lessons, never asked a wrong question or gave a wrong answer, always helped with chores, never complained. In fact, over the course of 8 years of training, he never gave us any cause for caution or reason to imagine why his parents may have been eager for him to leave Sarcophagus. I'm getting ahead of myself. The Jedi Watchman Nugloo of Aselis was the first of my peers to express some concern about Shykrill. Nugloo had been instructing a group of Jedi, including Shykrill, in how to use the Force to throw a new bladed weapon of his own design at wooden targets. After the lesson was over, Nugloo confided to me that Shykrill repeatedly hit his targets with extreme precision. I conveyed to Nugloo that I was not surprised, as Shykrill was one of our most promising Jedi. But Nugloo said to me, "You do not understand. I designed the weapon, and it still took me nearly 2 months to throw it with consistent accuracy. Shykrill's ability is not merely uncanny, it is unnatural." Nugloo returned to Aselis, leaving us with samples of his new blade, and leaving me with some inclination to pay closer attention to Shykrill, who was still training to be a Jedi Watchman himself. In the weeks that followed, I noticed no significant change in Shykrill's behavior. Then one night, I found him entertaining a trio of younger trainees, a Fia, a human, and an Osarian, with a shadow play near a campfire. Shykrill stood between the fire and a stone wall, using hand gestures to make lively silhouettes that told a story against the wall's surface. It was a very compelling tale about 2 brothers, one good and one bad. The good brother wanted to plant seeds and grow vegetables, but the bad brother wanted to eat all the seeds. Lending his voice to the narration, Shykrill made the good brother sound very noble and scholarly, and the bad brother sound like an illiterate oaf. The bad brother made the trainees laugh. Now you may have noticed by my hologramic representation that I am unlike most common species, as I'm without appendages or a complex physiognomy. Although I had always believed that my natural condition did not in any way impede my abilities as a Jedi, I suddenly felt something I had never felt before as I watched Shykrill's hands flutter and dance and cast shadows. Envy. I wished I had hands so that I might tell such a story too, with the skill and grace of the young Shykrill. And then I felt something else. Shame. Confused, I returned to my quarters to contemplate what had transpired and to meditate. 23 minutes later, my meditation was interrupted by the sound of screaming. The screaming attracted all the Jedi in our camp, and we raced to the area where I'd left Shykrill and his small audience. There we found Shykrill and two of the trainees lying on the ground, covered in blood. The third trainee, the Nosarian, was standing amidst the bodies, gripping one of Nugloo's weapons in his hands. It was the Nosarian who was screaming, and it appeared that he had used the weapon's blade to slash the others. He bellowed, "The shadows are in my head. Get them out." And then he slit his own throat and collapsed. Our medics did what they could. The 3 trainees died. Only Shykrill survived. Shykrill was still in bandages when I encouraged him to join me for a constitutional. He did not seem puzzled or surprised when I brought him to the site where the trainees had perished. There I conveyed to him that I had witnessed part of his shadow play, and that I had no idea he was such an accomplished storyteller. And with some boldness, I inquired if the shadows ever spoke to him. He answered, "You know they speak to me. They spoke to you too. I heard them. They made you wish you had hands of your own." I asked him how long he had been listening to the shadows. He said, "If you want to know whether the shadows spoke to me before or after I became a Jedi, I can't say." I asked if he controlled the shadows or if they controlled him. He said, "The shadows and I are the 2 brothers. One wants to plant the seeds, one wants to eat the seeds." Remembering his shadow play, I asked him whether he was the good brother or the bad brother. He said, "I am the brother who lived, and now it is time for you to join the shadows." I suddenly realized that I felt quite cold. Dread flooded over me, and a sickness spread within. But these feelings ended with supreme quickness as Shykrill's head separated from his body, having met the honed edge of Nugloo's blade. It was Nugloo himself who'd thrown the weapon from his hiding spot, for I had summoned him from Acellus when we buried the trainees. Somehow, both of us instinctively knew that Shykrill was responsible for the trainees' deaths, and that the only way to end his evil ways was to end his very life. I traveled to Sarcophagus to inform Shykrill's parents that their son was dead, allowing them to believe that he had died honorably. But yes, I had another motive for meeting the parents. I wanted to find out if the evil that seemed to possess Shykrill had preceded his recruitment to the Jedi. As delicately as I could, I inquired as to whether Shykrill had a brother. Indeed, I learned that they had had another son, but he had died 3 years before Cope was born. I asked if young Cope had ever talked to an imaginary friend, or if he had ever shared his shadow stories with them. The parents were polite, but seemed altogether baffled by these questions, and so I left them on their tomb world. Just as the Force flows through us all, so do we all have aspects that are positive and negative. But a Jedi knows the difference between light, darkness, and the shadows in between. Jedi cannot wrestle with decisions or struggle to uphold our ideals. We must know that what we do is good and just, and should we make mistakes, we must rectify those mistakes. What made Shykrill's innards so different, so wretched and weak, that he would yield to shadows, embrace them, let them overwhelm him? Why would he live amongst us for more than 9 years and learn our ways and methods, only to eventually kill those unfortunate trainees? Did these shadows he spoke of come from within himself? And did they die with him, or do they continue to exist beyond his death? I do not know, and I have no desire to venture into the shadows, where one might find the answers. But I do know that we, the Jedi, must be better and stronger than killers of children. We must be more. It is not our purpose to understand such shadows, but it is our purpose to use our light to extinguish them. Dark indeed were the shadows that plagued the mind of Cope Shykrill, a boy whose sinister aura even caused his own parents to find relief when they were offered a way for their son to be taken from their presence. It's been proven many times in the Star Wars universe that the dark side can flourish in young beings who know not what the Force is when their powers manifest. For the dark is quick, easy, and even fun. But perhaps for Cope Shykrill, It wasn't the dark side that dominated his mind, but the nebulous shade of his elder brother, one filled with malice and envy towards the living, who resided in the mind of his younger brother, waiting to strike at those susceptible to his invasive powers. 3 young Jedi were slain because of these shadows, and had Cope lived any longer, it's possible that thousands, or even millions of minds may have fallen in much the same way to his shadows. The dark side is a pathway to many abilities that some consider to be unnatural, and it is often the case that the dead in the Star Wars universe do not truly stay dead. And unfortunately for Cope Shykrill and the people who fell to his powers, it would seem that he and they may have been a victim of a combination of both. And who knows, perhaps a time will come again when a child is infested with shadows. Shadows that whisper in their mind to tear apart those of others, so they might bring misery, death, and destruction to all they encounter. For as vast as this galaxy is, there is always room for more evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Cope? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, my members, anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and especially Elijah Kai VA, our Dark Lord channel member. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.